Please join me in welcoming the Honorable Dan Patrick and the Honorable Jimmie Don Aycock. Chairman, Chairman in the middle. Thank you both for being here.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Good morning. I know we're a little delayed getting started. Traffic in Houston, I gather, is bad. Some of us drove on the tollway without a toll tag. We'll all be going to transportation jail in a few weeks, so this may be the last time that you see us. Chairman, I thought in the interest of time we'd dive right in. On Saturday, the Dallas Morning News and other news organizations reported that Texas is now 49th among the 50 states and the District of Columbia in per-student spending on public education. Only Arizona and Nevada are worse than we are. We're down from 41st in per-student spending before the last legislative session, 2011, when all the cuts happened. Chairman Aycock, is that something to be concerned about?
Absolutely, yes. Nobody enjoyed making those cuts last time, and I think to the degree possible, we'll try to reverse some of those this time.
To the degree possible, you'll try to reverse them. Does that mean that anybody who wants to see money go back into public education shouldn't be concerned about the pending lawsuit? We're waiting for an appeal by the state. A lot of people think that's going to freeze everything in place.
I think as far as the long-term implications of what I call the distribution model, or the equity issues, I don't think we'll take that part up extensively during the session. I think we'll probably put money into the present system, and admittedly that's awkward because the system's been declared unconstitutional. So
right.
How much you put into it, I think, is the amount.
It'd be a short-term solution rather than a long-term solution.
I think we'll see some short-term help,
right.
Not a long-term solution.
Chairman Patrick, will we see more money go into public education this session?
We will. I chair the Budget Committee on School Finance. We have a meeting this afternoon as well, and we're deciding on how to spend the additional dollars we have above the base budget. And above the base budget, under the Constitution, we have about $4.5 billion as of today to spend. And between healthcare and education, our first pass last week was 4.1 of the 4.5 billion.
Right.
So when we talk about dollars in Texas, and I know there's a hue and cry for more and more money for public education, and both Jimmie Don and I are strong supporters of public education because that's where 90 to 95% of students will go. But the reality is, under law, unless the public changes the law, we have $4.5 billion to spend today over base budget. And healthcare is consuming more and more of our budget every year. Yep. It threatens to swallow up the entire budget. And so the decision we've made is to put an extra $1.5 billion into education on top of the growth. That would add about $3.5 billion more than last session.
Yep.
And so those who say, I want my $5.5 billion today.
Not going to happen.
Well, there's no dollars.
Right.
And so the question that has to be asked is, do they propose a state income tax? Do they propose higher property taxes? What is it they propose? Because we already spend nearly half our budget on public right. education. There's so many dollars. There were some who said, Dan, why would you give schools more money when they are suing the state? And I think the majority of us made yep. the decision it was the right thing to do to take the dollars we do have and put those into the budget. So right now, the $4.5 billion, these are factual numbers under the Constitution. Right now, healthcare is slated to spend $1.7 billion. We're slated to spend $1.5, and so and then right. everything else gets the rest, which is a much.
Mr. Chairman, as I understand the math, though, not to get too far down into
sure.
the weeds here, as I understand the math, you're assuming that there'll be a legal finding that withdrawals from the rainy day fund don't count toward the spending cap. Isn't that right? If you say that you've got $4.5 billion, that doesn't count the money you take out for water or transportation or anything else that the rainy day fund would be used for this session.
Yeah, that is the understanding, but I don't know that there's a.
It's not resolved yet.
It's not resolved yet at this point.
Yeah. Mr. Patrick, Chairman Patrick, do you believe that we cut public education too much last session?
You know, that's in the eye of the beholder.
Well, I'm asking you. You're beholding. Tell us what you think.
And here's what I hear from the public, and here's what I hear from the business community. Everyone has a stake in public education. Everyone wants the appropriate amount of funding in areas of need. I'm a pre-K person, for example. I believe that pre-K done well is one of the best bangs we have for the dollar. But the idea of just throwing money at the wall
yeah.
in big clumps of money, that is not, that's what we did in the past, long before I was in the legislature.
Yeah.
And we haven't seen dramatic increases in results. We still have 20% of students or more, and in our minority community, very high numbers dropping out. And so a lot of people are saying, myself included, show me where you're going to use the money. Show me how it's effective, and I will do everything I can to support that. But to ask for a blank check, that I just need more money, that's going to be a tougher sell these days because, again, there's so much pressure on the money. And I want to go back to this issue of health care. A decade or more ago, folks, health care was 10 to 12% of our budget. It will be over 30% of our budget. It's going to soon be 50% of our budget. I mean, we have to get our arms around this.
So it's rapidly becoming, Mr. Chairman, it's rapidly becoming, as Chairman Patrick talks about it, an either or and not both and. I mean, those dollars are finite, but the priorities of the state are great, and we have to choose.
Unlike our federal friends, we can't print money.
Can't put it on the credit card.
That's right. We can't put it on the credit
Constitutionally.
card. Constitutional problem in the state, a good problem. We must balance that budget within the resources.
Right.
And back to your question about the funding for schools, I think it's not only programmatic. I think we both agree that pre-K is a great investment for the dollar. I'm one of those guys that think that we have a distribution problem where some districts are getting quite, at least close to adequate funding, if not adequate, and others are far below that. I think the distribution model is a critical part of our problem.
And that's really what the courts are
and I think that is the strongest arm of the lawsuit.
You both mentioned pre-K. Wasn't pre-K cut in the last session?
Yes.
Yes.
Did you both vote to cut pre-K in the last session?
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you think it's so important, why did you vote to cut it?
It's like your household budget. If the kids need shoes because they have holes on the bottom of their feet and you don't have money, they still get to wear the same shoes.
Right. Chairman?
Yeah, it's the idea, and I know that Jimmie Don, and we're working really well together on trying to resolve the issues. In fact, a lot of issues that have been talked about already, we're already resolving. They want to get rid of the 15% on testing, done.
We'll come to that, believe me.
But it's important. But it's important that we are chopping down big trees that superintendents and teachers and parents want us to chop down. The funding issue is something that the Tribune can help, and everyone here can help. Get the facts out. Let the people decide. But last session, it wasn't that the legislature wanted to punish educators. We had so many dollars to spend. And at the end of the day, as you know, because we have a supplemental budget now, we still came up short about $6 billion after our cuts. There was only so much money. The decision made, whether you agree or disagree with it, the decision was made that the public nor business wanted to see their taxes go up. That was the decision that was made. So again, as Jimmie Don says, you have so much money to work with under the Constitution.
Okay, Chairman, you asked that we talk facts. Let's talk facts. The last ranking of the public schools of the state by TEA, as you know, the categories have been, up to this point at least, exemplary, recognized, acceptable, unacceptable. The exemplary schools, on average, spend $1,000 per student more than the schools at the bottom in the unacceptable rung. And as you go from exemplary to recognized to acceptable, acceptable, unacceptable, the common thread is that the better the school performs, the more money has been spent per student. Do you want to talk facts? Let's talk about those facts. Do you think that suggests a correlation between per student spending and outcomes or performance?
Well, it depends on the study you look at. There's a group, and I forget the name of the group right now, based out of the Woodlands, who did a study of 200 school districts. And what they found, and I see Dr. Henry from Sci-Fair and Dr. David Anthony, formerly of Sci-Fair, who did an outstanding job with less money, right, Dr. Anthony? And Sci-Fair, on that chart of 200 schools, was considered the best bang for the buck, dollar for dollar. Sci-Fair, the third largest district in the state, I believe, the fastest growing district in Senate District 7. I'm proud to represent them. Sci-Fair accomplished more with less than another 199 school districts. So there's not always a correlation between dollars and performance. Now you can make a case and you can make numbers, make any point you want, but we all know what the key is.
Right. Of course, these are the TEA's numbers. So.
The key is great teachers and parents who care. And a good principal, and the funding needed to do the job. You give me those four elements and I'll show you a successful student. But where you have teachers who are not doing the job, parents who don't care, or schools that are underfunded, or principals. Look, my wife was a long-time school teacher. She worked under different principals, and it was a world of difference depending on that principal. We need to put a lot of emphasis on principals as well as teachers. I can give you a great school district, and I can give you schools 10 miles apart. One school outperforms the other because the principal is better. Yeah. This is a complex issue that is not solved by just writing a bigger check.
By mere money alone. Let me bang on this money question one more time, Chairman, and then we'll move on. The comptroller came back right before the session and said that we had $8.8 billion more in the last biennium than we thought we did, which I'll observe is not a rounding error. Right, that's a significant amount of money. It makes you wonder if this is any way to run a government that we find out 2 years later we had $8.8 billion more than we thought. I've asked a number of your colleagues in the House and Senate, including the Speaker, if you knew back then that you had $8.8 billion more than you thought you did, would you have cut public education? And to a person, they say no. So if we know we have the money now, why don't we just go back and reinstate the cuts?
First part of the question, no, I would not have made the cuts. Second part of the question is, I don't believe we have the amount of money that's spendable because of the movement in healthcare.
Because of the obligations that we have,
the obligations that we have.
You alluded to earlier. So it's not as simple as saying, well, we have the money now, just go back.
That money, while we have outpaced the estimates by that amount, remember we left a huge hole unpaid in the past budget.
Right.
And I think we have to pay that first.
Medicaid, school deferral, wildfires,
right. Speed ups.
Almost adds up to $8.8 billion.
It does. It's almost spent.
Right. Okay.
And so moving forward becomes the question.
So we're thinking that this is now going to kick beyond whatever you do this session. It'll kick into 2014 when we assume the Supreme Court will have ruled on an appeal, and then
probably
we think. And then we don't know, but we think. Okay. Each of you, Chairman, has a fairly large piece of legislation that sort of defines your early tenure as chairman. I wonder if each of you would say a word or two about what you're intending, and I want to ask you some questions about that, beginning with Chairman Aycock. This is HB 5, which
HB 5.
You and many people, the Speaker on down, have had a lot to say about. Would you talk about what's in that bill and why?
HB 5 has a number of purposes. It affects the graduation plan, hopefully giving students more flexibility to get into career technical options if they choose to do so.
Right.
We want to leave the door open for all of them to go to college if they choose to. Our present plan, with that minimum certificate that we allow, actually precludes kids from going to four-year academics straight away, and we want to get rid of that. I don't want children choosing that lower path. I want them to choose an upper path.
Right.
The testing component, I think, is excessive. I think we've agreed extensively that we're spending too much time, too much money, too much energy testing. Reweighing the pig doesn't make them get fatter, it just spends time. And so testing is a part, graduation plan is a part, flexibility is a part. School accountability in my bill is a big part, because I think our present system that you enumerated a while ago simply doesn't say much about what the public understands about the school. I want to break that up into components, both academic, budget, and finance. And I'm trying to pull in a very difficult to quantify measure called community involvement or student involvement. And that's admittedly hard to quantify, but I want those districts to have a voice in how they're evaluated and have some community buy-in.
Right.
As Senator Patrick said, you show me a community that's bought into their schools, more of them are moving up.
Chairman, let me ask you one or two questions about that before we ask Chairman Patrick to say a few words on his legislation. The reforming of graduation requirements often translates to people as a weakening of graduation requirements, that we're going to somehow make it easier for people to pass through high school without necessarily getting the education that they want or deserve. The upshot will be that our numbers will look better, but we won't be doing a better job of educating our students. Can you talk about that?
I think that is the balance we're trying to find. We do not want to get rid of testing. We do not want to get rid of accountability. We want to hold students accountable. I think the pendulum swings back and forth in most policy issues, and I think in this case the pendulum has swung too far to too much emphasis on testing. I think our 4x4, while well-intended, that to me it's about Algebra 2 primarily.
Yep.
And my son and I had this discussion last night about Algebra 2 being important. It is important, and for those kids that are going on to college, we'll find a strategy to encourage them to continue to take Algebra 2. For a young person that's going into cosmetology or pipe fitting, welding is the one everybody always picks on because it's in such high demand. All the machine operators, the folks that are doing hands-on skills, do we deny them in many cases the ability to graduate simply because they're having trouble with Algebra 2? My answer is I want them to get a skill.
So you are for a separate career and tech track that would give them a route past the 4x4?
I'm not going to call it a separate track.
Right.
What I want to do is give them the flexibility within each of what we're calling endorsements, and each of those
Right.
endorsements would have flexibility to go all the way from a college-bound kid all the way down to the one that's wanting the lowest skills.
Now, you may know, Mr. Chairman, that Commissioner Williams, the current education commissioner, has said to me and to others that he actually opposes a separate course of study for career and tech because he feels like it will be a dumping ground for kids who can't make it in the 4x4, and he doesn't want to see the standards lowered for them or for anybody else. What do you say about that?
And that's exactly why we did not create a specific track.
So it's more flexibility than a specific track.
I want the flexibility. I do not want to create a specific track, and I would very much like to get rid of that minimum certificate. We have about 20-something% of our kids now taking a minimum certificate that automatically tracks them into not eligible to go to college, for example.
Yeah.
And I'd like to modify that.
You'd like to fix that?
I want to fix that.
Let me ask you about testing and bring Chairman Patrick into the conversation as well, a not at all controversial topic around Texas or in the legislature. The response that many people who are for testing would give to the two of you, I'll sit in that chair for the moment, is why shouldn't parents and community members have a good way to know how their schools are doing? Isn't the purpose of the accountability system, of the testing system, to give parents a roadmap to better understanding, is my school doing a good job or a bad job? Is my student tracking well compared to his colleagues here and elsewhere or not? Why would we want to get rid of that?
Oh, I don't want to get rid of it.
Yeah.
And to that end, we've left Algebra 1, we've left English Language Arts 2, we've both reading and writing.
So you've reduced the number of tests?
Reducing the number of tests.
From 15 to 5.
To 5.
And you think 5 is an adequate number to provide that kind of accountability?
We've got people in the audience that think 0 or 3 would be better.
Oh, I think you probably have a number of those who think that, yeah. So why not go to 0 or 3?
I think part of it is the accountability system and the fact that we want these kids to be well-rounded.
Yeah.
Want them to be tested in each of those areas: social studies, science, math, English.
Yeah.
Don't want to get away from that.
Mr. Chairman, there are some number of school boards around the state. I think it's 86% at last count at the end of January of school boards around the state, representing 4.4 million students who have passed resolutions against testing. Politicians listen to voters. Those folks are voters. Why not just get rid of the whole thing?
Well, can I take a moment to talk about SB 3?
Oh, by all means.
Which is the mirror. It's
Yes.
very close to HB 5. And let me address this idea that we're lowering standards. In fact, we're increasing standards under SB 3. And let me explain. The 4x4, I don't look at it as 4x4. I look at it as 16 rigorous courses. And so in SB 3, the distinguished plan stays the same as it is now. No change, okay? The recommended plan now is 4x4. What we do is take the recommended plan and divide it into a STEM and a humanities path. The STEM is 15 instead of 16, but the elective is 1 extra math course or 1 extra science course. So it's still a rigorous 16. It just gives the student who's interested in math or science or STEM to go in that direction.
Yep.
The humanities, instead of 16, is 14, but that student must take 2 academic rigorous electives, an additional English, an additional social studies, in that track. So there is no weakening. And then in what is the minimum now becomes our foundation plan, we're adding a year of science. We're adding 2 years of foreign language. Every student must get 2 years of foreign language. And then we have our endorsement for career, and under career, that student is taking 4 Englishes, 3 math, 3 science, 3 social studies, and every other course will be a rigorous career course. Mm-hmm. So, I read in the paper or I hear rhetoric, and I can only conclude it's people who haven't read the bill.
These are the people who are saying it's weakening requirements.
It's just the opposite. As Jimmie Don said, we have 20%. Look, we have 20% of our students today not graduating. And in our high-risk minority schools, minority males, it's as high as 50%.
Do we even actually know, let me pause for a second there, do we even actually know how many people are not graduating? We had a report come out a few months ago that said that we were tied for 4th among the states in our high school graduation rate, and that news was met with guffaws. Nobody believed those numbers. Do we even know what our actual high school graduation rate is?
I don't know that we have an accurate count because there are different ways to look at it, and allegedly we've tightened that up. But let's just say there's even based on that report, an accepted number of 20%. Again, in minority male demographics, it's much higher. But if you have 20% of students not graduating, and 20% today on a minimum degree, which prepares them for nothing.
Right.
That's 40% of students who are of graduation age who are not prepared for a future in Texas. Now, look, the distinguished kids are going to be fine, and most of the recommended kids are going to be fine. My entire focus
is on those kids.
Is on that 40%.
Right.
If we don't lift, first of all, it's the right thing to do. You take away a student's ability to live the American dream by not giving them a quality education. 43% of all children today born in poverty die in poverty because they don't get a proper education. So when I look at career endorsement, for example, and Jimmie Don and I again, and we get criticism on that. Look, we get criticism today. My wife told me, again, she's a teacher, said, why do I want this job? The superintendents will be mad with you, the PTA will be mad with you, the teachers will be mad with you, you know, and different political factions will be mad with you. Our job is to do the right thing. Mm-hmm. Our job is to do the right thing by the schools and by the students. And I realize there's a great group, and they're out there doing their thing, save our schools, which is fine. How about save our kids? I'm focused on save our kids. We cannot exist, we will not have the workforce that we need in the future if we do not address that bottom 40%.
You're referring,
with
Save Our Schools, you're referring to this organization that had a rally yesterday or 2 days ago at the Capitol.
And I respect that.
And, you know, and took your name specifically in vain. I didn't hear your name taken in vain, but I did hear your name taken in vain.
Well, he's got a good Texas name, Jimmie Don. Who can take Jimmie Don?
Right, yes, right? Maybe you ought to, right. Say a word about testing as it relates to that 40%. Then I want to move on to choice, which I know is another big component of what you're doing.
In testing, in fact, today, and I came into this, and most of the legislation that we're presenting is legislation that's been written by superintendents and teachers and parents. I've gone around the state. I've talked to over 150 superintendents. A number of my superintendents are here. Since the time I was elected, we meet about every 6 months, and we don't always agree, but on the areas we agree, we try to work together on. And we learn together, and it's been illuminating for me. It's been a great experience for me. And so when I laid out the bill, Senate Bill 3, it was really written by educators,
so you think
not legislators.
There's consensus among your superintendents, the teachers in those districts, that the proper course here is to take the number of tests from 15 to 5, not 15 to 0?
Well, I think the testimony is that a number of organizations here and all the business community, 98% of the business community support Senate Bill 3, again, HB 5. So that concept, I think, we're moving forward. By the way, both of us include A through F once we get the right accountability
system. As a new ranking of schools.
As a new ranking.
Right.
But so parents know if their kids are in an F school, they have a problem. Today, they don't know acceptable, unacceptable, exemplary. It's kind of a gray area. In testing, I came into this with an open mind. I came into it thinking, what is a number? What's the rationale behind the test? And we had 8 hours almost of testimony last week, great testimony on testing, and I think that we are very close. Now, I may take a different view on the test. Maybe it's Algebra 1 and more emphasis on English, because the key to me is math and English. Build on those skill sets. If you can't read and you can't write, you can't learn.
Yeah.
I'm not so sure about some of the other classes, and that'll be a consensus of legislators getting together. But I'm going to send a letter to the commissioner today. And I'm going to recommend today that for this year, we have a moratorium on tests that we know are not going to be used moving forward.
You have specific tests that you're going to cite?
For example, world history and world geography. That is not doesn't mean the kids aren't going to take it and that they don't have to pass it.
Right.
But I haven't heard that in any formula of tests, whether it's Algebra 1, English 3, or English 2, history and biology, or whatever. So why are we going to test students this year and take valuable class time, put the teachers and the students through that stress if we know next year we're going to throw that test out? Mm-hmm. So I think we ought to put a moratorium on the tests that we know we're not going forward with. The others haven't been decided. But and I also would like to see the state fund SAT for every student.
With what money?
Pardon?
With what money?
We will find the money. Again, we go back to specifics.
Right.
We can find the money.
I'm going to interpret the laughing through my Berlitz program in my head. The laughing becomes, why are you going to find the money for this but not find the money for other stuff?
Well, it's a much smaller number than $5.5 billion. Again, it's like pre-K. I'm going to try, in my current proposal now, I have $50 million in for pre-K out of the 1.5 I have to work with. I'm going to put about 1.3 in the formulas $3 billion. We're going to fund communities in schools because it's a successful program, Teach for America. In other words, as we have less dollars, and this is where we need help from the education community. We don't need this, give me just more money. We need specific information of Dan and Jimmie Don, this works in my school. Fund this. I have the superintendent of HISD and the superintendent of Dallas Independent School District asking for Teach for America students. They do a great job for the most part. So that's an area. Again, communities and schools. So the SAT will tell us a lot along with a certain number, whatever that number finally is decided upon, of standardized tests.
Okay, let me move to choice. We don't have a lot of time before we open it up for questions. Obviously, Senator Patrick, Chairman, you've been talking about this now for several months. Right. You have a plan to flesh out very specifically what your plan is for greater choice. I don't think we yet know whether your intention is simply to do some form of open enrollment where the money would stay within public education, traditional or charter, or if you intend to allow parents to migrate those dollars out of the public education system into parochial and private schools. That really is the ball game, the difference between those two plans, right, isn't it?
Well, I sit back and I am amused at all the people who are writing stories and criticizing me for a bill I haven't even introduced. When I talk about choice, there's no magic bullet here, folks, but it's clear with, and I think in the introduction, 5 million students. We actually have about 5.15 if you count public charters, and then we have another 500,000 in private schools or home schools. So we have about 5.7 million. There is not a one-size-fits-all, whether it's regional, whether it's district, whether it's English language learners, whether it's economically disadvantaged, whether it's students that are disabled. So obviously, one size does not fit all. When I look at choice, I look at the key elements. What do we really need in schools today? We need innovation, we need rigor, we need transparency, we need empowerment for parents, students, teachers, and school districts. Let's get out, I don't like the federal government in my business. The state needs to get out of the classroom and get out of the school and try. There's been this sense of, well, if we don't test every student, how do we know the schools aren't going to have grade inflation? You know what? Okay, so we're going to have some bad actors out there. I think we have mostly good actors. I'm willing to trust the teachers. I'm willing to trust the superintendents. I think they're all in this business not to get rich, but to help kids.
So, Chairman, what is your intention then on choice?
So the intention on choice is, let's look at opening up open enrollment for public schools. Let a student go to any school that has capacity. We already have that in parts of the state. Out in West Texas, surprisingly, where students drive long distances, they go to different school districts because different districts are small, they don't offer everything. Number two, we have to begin the migration to online blended learning. That has to be a part of the solution of the economics of education. Let's get we only, about 1 out of every 3 math and science teachers have a degree in that subject. If we have a great math and science teacher in the state or history teacher, why not have them online teaching? So in those districts where they don't have that quality teacher, that those teachers can be kind of like with a teacher proctor in the classroom to get the best quality teaching. So online learning, public choice. 3, charter schools. We need to close down, and our legislation, Senate Bill 2, will close down poor-performing charters. Right. But we also need to bring in high-quality charters from out of state, and we pretty much had a firewall against that. We're changing those rules. Right. And we need authorizers so that we have professional people trained as authorizers so that we get the best quality charters and not what happened in the 90s, long before me. Apparently, a lot of our poor charters left over from then. And then we have to look at, and there's been a lot of talk about the business tax credit. And I was quoted in the Chronicle, I think, on this today. Look, we already have choice in Texas. Let's not fool ourselves. If you're rich, and most of the people in here have some money in their pocket and are white, okay, you can send your kids wherever you want to go. All right? If you live in a zip code with a bad school, guess what? If you send your children to private school, because some of you live in the inner city areas where you wouldn't send your kids to school, you do it. And I'm happy for you. I can afford to do the same thing. Or if you're not wealthy, but you don't like your school district, you move to the suburbs. That's what I call mobile choice. You move to Cy-Fair, you move to Tomball, you move to Katy, you move to Plano, wherever it is. That's choice. But if you're a woman who depends on public transportation, who's a single mom, who lives in an inner city, what choice does she have? We have 100,000 on the wait list for charters. Let's give those families a choice, number one. And number two, as a private citizen, I'd like to know where I can write a check to help that family. I think it's a civil rights issue, Evan. And for people to say, I'm against a poor working mom who can't move, who wants the best for her son as much as I want the best for my children who went to public school,
Yep.
to deny that woman that right, I think is shameful.
But Chairman, I think where people are objecting is in theory, because of course you
I'm
haven't
not taking money out of public
legislation
education
yet.
to do it.
Well, but if you move money over to parochial or private schools, that is where
If it's my money?
Well, but if the
it's
state
my
if the
money?
state is providing you with a voucher, let's call it what it is.
Wait a minute, you're writing the legislation suddenly?
Well, I'm asking.
I said I don't have a bill that does that.
Right.
I want to set up a structure in Texas. All of us are familiar with the 529 for colleges. Why? Because everyone knows there's a way I can write a check for my grandchildren to save money for college. I want to create a business tax credit or a business tax structure that can be funded individually, privately. It doesn't have to come out of anything in the state. But we need, right now, if there's a poor kid in downtown Houston, I'm willing to write that check. Today, my wife and I will commit to send a student to private school today out of our pocket from grade 2 to grade 8. If that's $30,000 or $45,000, $6,000 a year, I'll do it today. Okay? I'll start one of these nonprofits. I have been on the board of Be an Angel since 1988. And I don't normally talk about this, but I want people to know I'm committed to this. And our children at Be an Angel, we started out with 200 kids in that program in '88. Today, we serve over 5,000, the majority minority. And according to the charity, I've raised $16 million for those children in 24 years. So I'm not a Johnny-come-lately to this. I care about these kids, and I get angry about the fact that nobody wants to reach out and help these kids. So let's set up the structure. Let's get support to set up a structure where everyone in this audience can say, I'd like to help a child, and here's where I can help them. And so the child would be at 200% of free and reduced lunch in a failing school. And let that family apply to the nonprofit. Let that, with private funds, taking nothing out of public education. If they don't want to take it out of the tax, we were going to take 0.25%. 0.25% was the proposal originally, out of the of total funding for education. 0.25%. And people say, oh, don't do that. You're going to undermine public education. 5 million students, I'm talking about helping maybe 10,000. And so, you know what? If people don't want to do that, fine. But I'm going to help those kids. And why, as an Anglo-Republican in the suburbs? Because I care about those kids. And I hope every Democrat and every Republican, every business leader will do that with me.
When will when will the actual legislation be seen by all of us?
You have until March 8th.
Well, you have until March 8th.
You know, you have until March 8th.
Okay, so by March 8th.
We'll see it. But my point is, we've got to reach out and help these families. And I'm willing to get behind the effort. If that's going to be my life's work, that will be my life's work to lift up those kids. It doesn't give me any votes. It doesn't give me any good press. But gosh darn it, we have families, and we see their stories every day when they go to a charter school and they blossom and they become successful. And we can see that in a charter or a private school.
Chairman, what Senator Patrick is talking about is obviously one of the big conversations of the session. The thought is that there may be more support for such legislation in the Senate than the House. Do you support it? Will you be joining him in this effort? And do you think the votes are there in the House for some kind of choice program?
I think any choice that the House would receive would have to have some characteristics to it that we may or may not see. Since he hadn't introduced the legislation, I don't want to prejudge that.
Right.
I think that the thought of accountability, anything that's going to spend public funds, I think has to have an accountability feature tied to it. I don't think many people in the House want to see public dollars spent without knowing the results of those dollars.
I need to interrupt. We're not talking about public dollars. I'm talking about setting up a structure where a private citizen, a business owner, or a politician out of his campaign account would be helpful. We could fund 181 kids tomorrow. Private money, your own money. I mean, if I introduced a bill today, if I introduce a bill today that says you can't, no one in this audience can send their kid to private school, people say, what do you mean I can't send my kids to private school? Private money, my own money. I just want a vehicle where people know to go. No public money. Do you think the House will support a vehicle?
Does that sound something more like what you're talking about?
Well, I don't think if it doesn't spend public money, I don't know why.
People would object to it.
People would object to it. I don't know why it would even require a piece of legislation, quite candidly.
Well, it requires legislation so we can set up the infrastructure so that people can have confidence when they get. We've seen what's happened at CPRIT. I want to be sure that people have confidence that where they send their money, it's going to the right kids. But right now, and the truth is, if I wanted to help a child, I really don't, there's no place that I could go as a citizen out here. Someone says, you know, I'm willing to write a $5,000 check a year, which is the average cost for K through 8 in most private schools, Catholic, Protestant, and Jewish schools in the area. I've talked with all those groups. I think there are thousands of people in Texas who would line up and say, I'm going to help that child. I think there are. But we have to have a structure. It just can't be willy-nilly.
Chairman. to continue. So do you think that what we're talking about here with the conditions
I think
that
as long as it has private money in
right.
it, and we're just looking for a clearinghouse type operation to make
so something
sure
that's more of an open
board.
enrollment deal within public education as well. That would you'd find support in the House.
I think you'll find support for that, sure.
Okay. We're going to stop right here just in the interest of time. Both these gentlemen need to get back to the Capitol, but we're going to ask for some questions from the audience. Natalia, how much time do we have for questions before we get them out of here? About 10 minutes. We have microphones in the aisle. If you prefer to just stand in your seat and use your outside voice, you're happy to, welcome to go ahead and do that, or walk to the microphone. Ma'am?
Hi, this question is for Dan Patrick. You mentioned at least 5 times that I counted, I lost track. You referred to they and people want us to write a blank check. Can you please be more specific in who you're referring to?
Yes, anyone who says, whether they're a parent, whether they're a member of an organization, whether they're the superintendent, who just says, we want $5.5 billion more, give us all the money. I mean, I haven't heard any specifics. Now, when I talk with my superintendents in our area that I work with, I hear specifics. But I haven't heard any specific. And again, I go back to, we don't have that money. So let's quit making the argument for something we don't have. It's not a case that Jimmie Don and I are sitting on a treasure chest of $5.5 billion and we're saying, no, you can't have it. We don't have it. And so they are people who just say, give us money, and they've never read the budget. They don't understand the budget. They don't understand the Constitution. They don't understand how much money we have. So they're putting up this false argument that somehow the legislature just simply doesn't want to give schools the money. That's not the case at all.
Saying the general public and or educators?
I'm saying people who just say, we need more money for education, give us what you owe us. That's whoever they are, the 2,000 people that marched in Austin on Saturday, or however many people were there.
And you're also saying this is the majority of people that you're hearing. You're not hearing specifics, you're hearing.
No, I'm not saying that's the majority. I'm saying, but that's what you hear without specifics, and it's a one. In other words, what I would counter, and I don't have the millions to respond. I can only respond in the position, the platform that I have. But if we want to give, if the consensus is that we want to write a check for $5.5 billion and just spread it out, and by the way, all the superintendents aren't happy about that, because you have superintendents in certain districts that they want more than another. Trust me. I mean, it's not kumbaya with 1,000 superintendents either. There's arguments over who gets that money. My point is that the public needs to know, if you want $5.5 billion, then you're going to have to face higher taxes at some level somewhere to generate the revenues.
Well, in fact, Mr. Chairman, if Judge Dietz in Austin is correct about the unconstitutionality of the school finance system, and the Supreme Court were to uphold Judge Dietz, we could be talking about $2,000 per enrolled public school student, or $10 billion, not per biennium, per year. So $20 billion would have to somehow magically appear. There's no way for that money to come into the system without a tax bill, isn't that right?
Correct.
It's the mother of all tax bills.
You'd have to have a tax bill.
Yeah.
Right. So you all better hope that the Supreme Court overturns Judge Dietz, because otherwise you're not going to have the money without having to raise taxes.
And the history of the Supreme Court has never given a specific dollar amount. And again, it goes back to, you know, education takes about half of our budget, roughly, today. And again, healthcare is quickly rising
to
going to rise up. So if healthcare, ma'am, if healthcare becomes 50% and education's 50%, I'm just saying that let's have a real discussion and let's solve these problems so we can stay out of the court every 4 or 5 years, and let's fund education. Yeah. And all of us want to do it right.
Chairman.
Those that haven't noticed, this thing we call the base bill, where we start from, now whether it winds up that way or not, we don't know yet.
Right.
But in that base budget,
that's about $89 billion.
Right.
During the second year of the biennium, Article 2, which is the Health and Human Services article, surpasses for the first time in Texas history Article 3, which is the education
as
part.
A percentage of the budget.
As dollars and as a percentage.
Yeah. Well, that's why we've got the health care issue. Well, let me come back to this tax question.
That's a really important point that he makes.
No,
that we need to have a serious discussion about.
It's the magnitude of the problem, and you alluded to it. I'm going to come to you in 1 second. On this tax question, you talked about pre-K earlier. Mayor Castro of San Antonio took matters into his hands, I think you know, in the last election cycle by using his personal celebrity and political capital to pass an 1/8 of a cent sales tax increase in San Antonio so that 22,000 4-year-olds could get full-day pre-K. If a tax bill is the only way to get revenue, why not let people vote up or down on whether they consider public education to be an important enough priority, and if they want to raise taxes in their communities to put into some aspect of public education, you guys like local control, why not allow that to happen?
Well, it's real simple, because under Robin, this is why we have to have real serious discussions. Let's get all the politics and all the rhetoric out of the way. How are we going to fund education for the fastest growing state in the nation, where 60% of the students are economically disadvantaged and about 15% are challenged speaking English? How are we going to do this? And we're not going to do it if we don't sit down and talk and try to work out a long-term plan and a strategy. That's the key, Evan. That's what we have to do.
Maybe a tax bill, Chairman, is what we need. I know that's the third rail in Texas, but maybe we need to touch it.
Well, there's, for example, last week Senator Eltife proposed a fuels tax. Most people don't.
He got slapped around the head for that, didn't he?
Slapped around the head pretty hard.
Yeah.
But the other part of that fuels tax, remember, is that constitutionally, 1/4 of the fuels tax is constitutionally dedicated to available school fund.
Right.
And so that one tax alone would both solve some of our transportation needs and some of our education.
Are you coming
needs.
out for it today?
I'll just be brave and say yes.
Really? You'll be hearing from Michael Quinn Sullivan in about noon today, I think.
It won't take that long.
All right.
Right, and Evan, on the school tax, the other side of that is because of Robin Hood, districts, many of the districts who are the donor districts, there's no value to them to raising their tax rate. All the money does is go to another district.
Right.
One of the things I think we should look at in terms of long-term financing, combination of sales and property tax, but maybe the addition of additional golden pennies to districts that they can raise, that they keep, to keep up with inflation. And then that allows, but you're still going to have other districts say, well, because a penny, and again, this is a complex issue that we need to get the facts out so people understand. A penny means more to some districts than it means to others.
Right.
So if I allow Spring Branch or Cy-Fair to raise it a penny, or Plano, well, they're going to get a higher yield than a poor rural district. So then the rural districts say, well, you know, if they get 2, I need 6. I mean, this is...
It's
folks,
escalation.
This is a serious issue.
Are you for the Eltife bill? Chairman Aycock was brave. Will you be brave?
Yeah,
are you for the Eltife bill?
My head is buried in education 24/7, so I haven't seen the Eltife bill even though he's a senator, so I'd have to look at it.
If I'm going to take the hit, can I expand on it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
When we talk to our constituents, they say they want a tax that's based on consumption, that's transparent, that doesn't add any bureaucracy in its collection. The fuels tax does all those things.
Yeah.
It addresses one of our most important needs, which is transportation. At the same time, it addresses our other important need, which is education. I know Senator Eltife got whacked around the head. I know that saying that you're for a tax increase of any kind is a politically suicide thing to say. But sometimes you got to face the reality. If we want good roads, we want good education, we want a water plan, there is no free lunch.
Brave indeed. Ma'am.
Good morning. My name is Joanne Salazar, and I'm with TAMSA. My question is easy to Senator Patrick. Is it your intent to file one bill regarding accountability testing and choice, or will you have separate bills? You know,
I've been very deliberate. We've had informational. We have Jeb Bush coming in Wednesday to Austin. He's going to testify before our committee, and we invited Jimmie Don and some of the House members over, and we have some other leaders from around the country on a number of these issues come out and talk about what has worked and hasn't worked in other states. I don't anticipate one big bill. Again, there's been a lot of speculation by a lot of people who aren't on my staff. I think I wanted to have on I thought SB 3 and what Jimmie Don is doing is so important in HB 5 in the endorsements that I didn't want to attach testing to it because that would have been all the headlines and we would have missed the dynamics of the policy, which is really important what we're doing with career tech and graduation pathways. And so now we're studying the testing issue, and I don't know, I can't guarantee this, but my thinking is I'd like to get a consensus from the members on the committee, and we'll probably have an amendment on the floor, if we can get agreement, to Senate Bill 3, which would marry up testing with Senate Bill 3, and it will look like, and look, Jimmie, this guy is really smart, and I have great respect for him. He decided to go a different path. I just wanted to separate them in the beginning. But now look, the members of our committee, I've been on education since '07. I've been vice chair for 2 years, but all but 2 of my members have never been on education before. They needed to get all of this information out and hear, all but one, I'm sorry, Senator Seliger is back for a second session.
But you look for it to be an amendment, as I'm understanding.
Yeah, I think so, but we may file a separate, the consensus made to file a separate bill, but they need to marry at some point. whether we move HB 5 or whether he moves Senate Bill 3, one of the things that Jimmie Don and I, we came in together, we're friends. We have said what's important is not that a bill is a House bill or a Senate bill, that it's the right bill, and we need input from teachers and parents and we're getting a lot of input. And look, we know that we're not going to please everyone on every aspect. There are going to be some people that think there should be no test, or there should be 2 less than whatever we decide, or 5 more than we decide. Some think there should be additional testing if you're in the distinguished program, for example. There are going to be superintendents who like 80% of what we do, but not 20%. If at the end of the day we pass legislation where almost everybody gets 70 or 80% of what they want, then I think we will have had a successful session.
We need to get these guys out of here. I want to be sure we take your questions quickly and respect them if they need to go. Ma'am.
Sure. Hi, Representative Aycock. I just had a question for you. I'm Christy Thiebout. And
Hi, Christy.
Member,
I can't see you for the lights.
former member.
Hello.
Hi. And it's good to see you here, Senator. He's my state senator, so
you.
I'm glad to see him here.
Good to see you.
I think you touched on this a little bit, and I know this will probably be decided in the long term, but in the short term, are you going to address the formula situation and the difference funding levels in each school district? I know that I represented 3, and they all had different rates at what they got. And I know I heard David Anthony talk about also, I know that school districts can do less with more, or more with less, but I also heard David Anthony saying that that wasn't sustainable, the excellence at his school district at his level. So I know we have to do something. Are you going to address that in the short term?
Chairman.
This session?
I would be surprised if we took on the formula issue during the regular session. When you say during this term, yes, I think that answer will almost certainly come during this term, not during this regular session.
Or maybe a special?
It may come up in a special.
I would say it's highly likely that we will have a special session depending on when the courts rule. And at that time, I think the issues of equity especially will have to be, and the disparities between highs and lows. You know, in that court case sometimes back, there was something in the neighborhood of $600 that was allowable. We don't know what that number is really. And how we find a gap that from the very highest to the very lowest, some people say is as high as $5,000 per student now. And so getting that back down to a manageable number is not an easy thing. We are constrained by our Constitution. We're constrained by the physical realities of the state. We're constrained by court cases, and trying to comply with all of that at one time has proven to be very difficult, as you know, and I think it will continue to be very difficult. The simplest answer, and I'm not particularly for this, so you need to ask, but the statewide property tax value, I think a constitutional amendment would solve the problem in a simple way. My folks at home don't want to trust the Texas legislature to set their tax rate. And so,
yeah. And on the $1.3 billion that I talked about that we're going to add into the formulas, we agree that we'd get us off target revenue in 2017. I want to keep us on that glide path. So we're working, Senator Duncan and I, Senator Seliger and others, we want to, a combination of the basic allotment and the adjustment factor, so we give more money. In the past, if we had $1 billion or $3 billion, whatever it was, everyone got the same under hold harmless and everybody followed the same track. What we want to do with the money we have now is to lift up the districts at the bottom, not take anything more from the districts at the top, give them less. But they get an increase, the schools at the bottom get more of an increase, and with at least the $1.3 billion that we have, again, these are what I would like. You know, I'm prejudiced. I think I have some of the best superintendents in the district, in the state, some of the brightest. A lot of the ideas that are in my legislation come from
Oh, it's right. That's why I moved school districts. I'm one of those mobile people.
There you go. You're one of those mobile folks.
Right, yeah.
But if we could get and as I go around the state and meet superintendents, if we could get a team to sit down, regardless of what the courts do, we still have to solve this long term, to sit down and say, let's work together out of the glare of the lights of the court and the lawsuit. And let's come together and figure out how to do this. Because for me, for example, you take Tomball and Cy-Fair across the creek, there could be a family. You know, that one brother lives in Tomball, one lives in Cy-Fair, and they say, how come my kid gets less than my brother's kid in Tomball? Tomball doesn't want to give their money up, but Cy-Fair needs more. So these are issues that we have to have serious people to have discussions with, and the best people to do that are the superintendents, I believe, because at the end of the day, I think they want to do what the right thing is, and they are realists, and they know the issues they face and where they need the money.
The deal I made with these guys when they agreed to come was that they would be allowed to leave at 9:45 to get back to Austin. We have hit our window. I need to let them go. Please, questioners, forgive me for not being able to call on you, but we appreciate the fact that they were able to make time during a session to be here. Please give a hand to Chairman Aycock and Chairman Patrick. Thank you. Thank you very much. We'll take a slightly shorter break than planned, set up for our next panel, and keep going.